Hey there, guys. This is Cole. Welcome back to another movie review. Yes, as you can see, I'm at a different place. I'm at my dad's house, but today I'm gonna be reviewing a movie that I rewatched, and that is the 2010 vampire movie, Daybreakers, starring Ethan Hawke, Willem Dafoe, Isabel Lucas, and Sam Neill. Now, this is a movie that I had heard about it a couple years ago, but I didn't get around to watching it until like about 2 years ago, as it was free on Tubi. And then, well, last year for Christmas, I got this on DVD, to own it, and I finished rewatching it, and I still like this movie. So what is the plot synopsis so what's the plot to the movie Daybreakers? Well, the plot of the movie is as follows. Ethan Hawke plays Edward Dalton, a researcher in the year 2019, when an unknown plague has transformed the world's population into vampires. As the human population is nears extinction, vampires must capture and farm every remaining human, or find a blood substitute before time runs out. However, a group of vampires makes the remarkable discovery, one of which has the power to save the human race. So that's the basic plot synopsis to the movie. Now, how was this movie received? Well, now I know on Google it's listed as a 2009 movie, but the only reason that is because it debuted at a film festival in 2009. But when the movie was theatrically released worldwide, especially in the US on August of 2010, it received decently positive reviews from critics, but a mixed reaction by audiences. Now, as for my reaction to the movie, I rather like this movie. So, let's get into the review. The movie starts off where we are introduced to a character by the name of Edward Dalton, who, like I said, is played by Ethan Hawke. And in this movie, like, we're basically introduced to like this sci-fi futuristic world where vampires are trying to hunt humans. And again, there's like only 10% of the human population, like 5% of the human population left. So the vampires are going near extinction, and we're introduced to Edward Dalton, who is played by Ethan Hawke, who basically works at this company. He basically works at this blood company that basically captures and farms humans. And they basically have a meeting saying that the population is nearing extinction and we got to take care of it. And the guy who's running this organization is named Charles, who is actually played by Sam Neill, who I do rather like as an actor. Now his most iconic, recognizable role is Dr. Alan Grant in the Jurassic Park movies, that being Jurassic Park 1, 3, and then Jurassic World Dominion. He was also in movies like Event Horizon, which I do rather like that movie. He was also in the John Carpenter movie he was in the John Carpenter movie in the Mouth of Madness, which is a very underrated horror movie from the 90s. I might review that this month if I get time, but anyways, back on to the review. So, yeah, we're introduced to that, and then early on in the movie, at nighttime, there is a group of humans driving their car, but Edward Dalton, played by Ethan Hawke, is in a car accident, and he basically asks the humans if they're okay and stuff like that. But then the humans, obviously are scared because of how all the other vampires are, and the dad and the mom of this kid basically shoots across. The mother of this family shoots a crossbow at Edward, but then he says, "Stop shooting at me." He says, "Look, get into my car. I can help you," and stuff like that. And what I really like about this movie is the futuristic technology, where basically, like, for example, like, basically he has, like, the main character, Edward, the way his car is designed, he basically has this feature where if you press a button, all the windows in the car would be completely covered up in black, so you can't see on the inside of it. So that's pretty cool. But basically, a group of vampire cops are vampire police officers in a police car are driving, and Edward makes the family hide in the car, and the cops ask Edward if he's okay and stuff like that, and he says yeah, and then he distracts them and he says, "I think the humans went that way," and stuff like that. So then the vampires leave, and, Edward is able to save the humans, and they're like, thank you for that. And then, Edward goes home to his house, and Edward is an interesting type of vampire because all the other vampires in this movie basically want to eat humans and, get their blood supply. But Edward, he does not want to do that. He doesn't believe in that. But Edward's son is at the house and stuff like that, and he basically gets him a bottle of, well, what looks like a bottle of champagne, but it's really a bottle of human blood and stuff like that. And then Edward says, no, I'm not going to drink that. I can't, and stuff like that. And he's like, come on, Dad, you need it. And he says that pig blood supply is running low and stuff like that. And then there's like a vampire bat-like creature inside the house that tries to attack them, but then Edward and his son have to fight it off, and in a rather well done scene. And then not long after that, the next day, basically, the mother that of the children that Edward saved basically come back to his house, and they basically say that she basically tells him, look, here is my name and my number and stuff like that. And the reason she was able to go to Edward's house is because when she was hiding in the car from the other vampires earlier, she basically found his ID and stuff like that and where he lives. So she went to his house, and, they have a conversation, and she basically says, look, I basically need to help find vampires that we trust to save us and stuff like that. So then she ends up giving Edward a card and stuff like that of what her name is, and basically writes him a note to meet her at a certain destination at noon, because and now I know what you think. Well, sunlight would burn vampires, but like I said, Ethan Hawke's character, he basically has a card that will basically use technology to put shields over the windows so he doesn't get sunburned, and he basically has a monitor to see where he's driving and stuff like that. So then, he goes to the destination, as he was instructed, and then he basically drives his car under a tree where shade is covering up the whole cars, so he doesn't get burnt. And he meets up with a guy by the name of Lionel, who is actually played by Willem Dafoe, who I rather like as an actor. He was in this movie. I mean, obviously, his most well-known role is Green Goblin in the first Spider-Man movie, but he was also in movies like Platoon, which is an iconic Vietnam War movie. He was also in the first John Wick movie. I've always liked Willem Dafoe as an actor, and it was cool to see him in this type of movie. But then, basically, one of the vampires is basically wearing a sunproof suit and is pointing a gun at the woman, and they basically tell Edward to put the weapon down, and like you can get away, you can get some serious jail time for this. But then the woman, she basically, because the vampire was an idiot and he didn't have his face shield on, the woman pushes him into the sunlight, and he gets burnt on the face. And then, well, the woman takes a gun, and, Edward and them get inside his car, and they drive away because vampires driving a military car tank thing basically start shooting at them. And I will say, this is a really good chase sequence, and I think the Spierig brothers, I think that's how you say their name, do a rather good job with the way they direct this movie. When it comes to the tension and the action scenes, I think that they are rather well done by the Spierig brothers, and I think that they're pretty underrated. Now, I know they did that really bad Saw sequel, Jigsaw, which, when it comes to the Saw franchise, I really liked the first two movies. The third one was okay, but you did not need any more Saw movies after that. But I think that these directors, when they do original movies on their own, it can work like this movie. And honestly, I would like to see the Spierig brothers make a comeback to Hollywood with a different type of movie. Like, maybe instead of a vampire movie, do like a haunted house movie. I think that could work. But anyways, getting back to the review, so basically Edward, his partner Lionel, and the girl, they basically go to like this house so they can basically work on getting a cure to basically turn vampires back into humans, but the vampires know that where they're going, so they don't have a whole lot of time to do it. And during nighttime, Willem Dafoe's character Lionel, he basically has like a walkie-talkie that they use to talk to the humans, the survivors, and basically there's a part at nighttime where they're driving, but one of the vampires is able to use a tranquilizer dart, flattening one of the tires, but then they basically find out, basically members of this woman's family, her children and her dad, who basically drove off, but the mother stayed at the house where Edward and Lionel are. Basically, the vampires ambush a whole group of people and stuff like that. And then, we're introduced to the main bad guy of the movie, who I said is played by Sam Neill. We're introduced to his daughter, who his daughter is actually human, and her dad is vampire and stuff like that. And basically he says, "How are you doing, sweetheart?" And she says, "Stay away from me." And he says, "Look." And she basically asks, "Where are my friends?" And the dad smiles, and she is like, "Get away from me." And then she, stabs him in the chest with like a, like he doesn't die, but like he gets stabbed in the chest with like a, kind of like a plastic ice, basically like a pen, but it's like made out of glass, I guess, something like that. I guess that's really the best way you describe it. And then instead of the dad turning his daughter into a vampire, he gets one of his men to do it and stuff like that. And but that does play a factor, which we will get to. But then we basically learn how Lionel, who is Edward's friend, we learn how he got the cure from vampire to human, which I know some people criticize this element when the movie came out, and normally, yeah, it does kind of break the rules, but honestly, I'm okay with that, because not every vampire movie needs to stick to the same formula. I like when some try to do stuff differently, but basically what happened was, we basically get the backstory that Lionel, Willem Dafoe's character, was driving a car, but he basically flew out the front window and he was burning from the sun, and then he landed into the water, and then he goes into like this tunnel, and then he walks out, but the sunlight doesn't affect him, because basically with the way it works is there is basically this type of, there is a limited amount, and there is a very specific way it has to be done, but with how you control it. But basically, to sum it up, if you control sunlight in a certain way on a vampire, but do it in a way where like you burn them a little bit, but then you stop burning them, it can basically cure them into being back into a human. And then Edward is eventually cured, and he's turned back into a human and stuff like that, which I thought, yes, it does break the rules, but again, I don't need every vampire movie to copy the same formula. I mean, do not get me wrong, Burger King is good, but it's not healthy to have every day and stuff like that. You gotta switch things up, so I would apply that logic to vampire movies. But then later in the movie, throughout the course of the movie, there's this stuff going on where Sam Neill's character, played by Willem Dafoe, sorry, the bad guy of the movie, played by Sam Neill, basically Edward comes into his office later with the woman who's trying to survive with them and stuff like that, and basically what happens is that, Edward is brought into the office of the bad guy, played by Sam Neill, and the woman is with them too, as the woman was captured. But basically Edward is basically talking about him, and I like the part when Edward asks him, "How did it feel to turn your daughter into one of them?" And he says, "Oh, wait a minute, you must have got your partner to do it for you. That's how pathetic you are." And then the vampire bites Edward on the neck, but Edward does not turn into a vampire because he's already cured. And then the vampire bites into him, and then And then the vampire bad guy, played by Sam Neill, bites into him, and he slowly starts turning back into human. He's like, ew, this blood's gross. Like, what is this? And stuff like that. And then I like the part closer to the end of the movie where the main bad guy of the movie, played by Sam Neill, Ethan Hawke's character, Edward, he basically ties him up to a chair and he brings him down an elevator. And then the elevator opens up, and then a whole bunch of vampires just go all over him and like start attacking him, and like in a rather well done sequence. And again, I thought that this was a rather good movie. And I thought that the action scenes were good, and the tension when it needed to be there was good too. Now, okay, do I have any negative qualities for the movie? Now, I guess some of my negatives with the movie, the CGI has not really aged the best for this movie, and the whole ending can be looked at as a negative because basically with the way this movie ends, Sam Neill's character, not Sam Neill, Willem Dafoe's character Lionel, him and Edward and the woman are basically driving a car away, and he basically narrates, it's not too late. We have the cure and stuff like that. It's not too late to cure yourself and stuff like that. And with the way it ends, it did kind of feel like a sequel tease with the way the movie ended, and the movie never had a sequel, so that can be looked at as a downside. But other than that, this was a pretty good movie. I did like it. And so yeah, guys, that was my review of Daybreakers. And if you're wondering how I'm going to rate this movie, here's how I'm going to rate this movie. So overall, if you do like vampire movies, and you want to see a vampire movie that doesn't really get talked about a whole lot, then definitely pick this movie up for your collection. And on a scale of 1 to 10, I am going to give Daybreakers a 9 out of 10. There we go, guys. That was my review. And next up, I will be reviewing the 1982 horror movie Creepshow, directed by George Romero, which I am actually seeing in the movie theaters with my dad and my girlfriend tomorrow, who they've never seen it. So that'll be a cool experience. But yeah. Anyways, guys, I gotta stop. Anyways, guys, I gotta go now. I gotta get some stuff done, and I'll upload this video sometime later today. And yeah, we'll talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.